So it looks like we're going to be hanging out inside for at least a little while longer, and with the colder months coming up fast, there's never been a more perfect time to stock up on all your comfy clothes. Lucky for you, you listen to the Choose Your Struggle podcast, and I have a sweet deal for you today. Check out my sponsor, Pair of Thieves. They've got everything you need, from shorts to lounge pants to underwear and bras. They even have a line of Disney socks with all your favorite characters on it. But here's the best part. If you use the link in the show notes or on my podcast website and the discount code Rakuten Thieves, don't worry, that's in the show notes too, you'll get 20% off every full price item in your shopping cart. So stock up on all your comfy clothes today and help out the podcast in the process.
But I'm going to just go ahead and invite Jay Shifman up to share his story. So let's give it up for Jay.
Welcome to the Choose Your Struggle podcast. I am your host, Jay Shifman. Hello and welcome to the Choose Your Struggle podcast. Thank you for tuning in this week. It's episode 42. This is being recorded on Wednesday, November 4th. So if you're expecting me to talk about a lot of politics, what's happening with the election, it's not going to happen because it's chaos right now. I am going to pop in later. I'm going to record something tomorrow before this episode comes out. But before we begin, I do want to talk about something that I'm really excited about. You all know, because you listen to this podcast, that when we're talking about issues of substance misuse, recovery, drug use, period, you know, there's really no bad way as long as we're doing it honestly, as long as we're doing it from a place of education and personal experience, right? As long as it's not just, I feel this way, you know, it's all good and we need to tell these stories. If you had told me 5-10 years ago that Greenleaf Book Group, which is a pretty major publishing house that put out a book that I really like, and I read a couple years ago called Activate Your Brain, which is a book all about understanding, you know, what's going on inside your head and how it works, which obviously, you know my story. I went back to school and got my psychology degree just so I could understand what was happening, you know, inside my own brain when I went through my experience. But if you would have told me in 2020 they were going to put out a book about substance misuse, I would have been like, nah, man, no, we don't talk about these issues, you know? So I want to applaud Greenleaf Book Group real quick, and specifically their imprint, River Grove Books, because they're putting out a book called Unraveled. And, alright, I'm just going to go ahead and read you the first line of this synopsis, and you can tell me why you think I'm so interested in this, alright? With intense courage and candor, a mother and son share their raw journey into alcoholism and drug addiction, and the grueling work it takes to get out of it. So, can you see why I'm so excited about this? We need more major publishing houses to be willing to put out honest conversations around issues of substance misuse. This is a big deal. And more than that, for those of us who care about this, you know, this is a major win. But it's one thing. Look, I've actually been given advanced copies of other books like this and asked to do blurbs, and I've done a couple, and it's fun. I appreciate, look, don't get me wrong, I really love that I've reached the point where people want that from me. That's very touching to me. It's another thing altogether when the book is good, and the praise for this book is off the charts. So a giant thank you to Greenleaf Book Group and River Grove Books for putting this out. A shout out to Unraveled, obviously, the book itself. Go check that out. And thank you to the authors, Laura Cook Bolt and her son Thomas Henry Bolt, because this is difficult to do. You know, I've toyed with writing a book. It's hard. Writing a book is really hard, especially when it's telling your story like this. So huge, huge applause to the mother and son team who wrote Unraveled. It's out now. You can get it at all your bookstores, including your indie bookstores, which is obviously what we all want to support. So go check it out. Unraveled, the book. So the beautiful thing is that directly relates to this episode. This episode is with someone that I greatly admire. They say never meet your heroes. And you know, I've been on both sides of that. I've been really lucky to hang out with people I admire, and some have been amazing, a couple have not been. But one person who has just sort of turned that idea on its head for me is today's guest, Ashley Loeb Blassingame. Ashley is the host of the Courage to Change podcast. You should all recognize that name by now because I was on it earlier this year. It went out as a special episode earlier this season. And her producer, Christiana Kimmich, was on this podcast a couple weeks ago. So I really admire she and her team are doing at Lionrock Recovery. You'll hear our conversation. The biggest thing for me, the biggest thing that Ashley does, I have been accused of being anti-AA before, which is not the case. I am very pro-AA because I'm pro everything that works. What I'm anti is my way or the highway thinking, which unfortunately permeates a lot of the recovery space, period, more often in the AA camp. What I am hugely for is people like Ashley who do it right. Ashley and Lionrock offer a myriad of different recovery methods. They sort of put a lot of it together and tailor it towards the person. And Ashley got sober through AA and is a person who is willing to discuss AA's pros and cons, the warts and all. And so those people I have the utmost respect for. You know, I would never recommend my recovery path for everybody. In fact, it was very difficult. And anyone who says otherwise, it just to me is being disingenuous. And you'll hear in this conversation, Ashley and I were able to have a really frank conversation around recovery. We went through very similar experiences, in some ways very different than others. And we talk about that. And that's why I called this episode what I did. If you somehow haven't seen the episode title, it's Speak Honestly and Carry Big Facts, because a lot of what's happening in the recovery space is not built on facts. It's built on this is how we've always done things, thinking, and that never works. So thank you to Ashley. Thank you to the shout out today, who's Brendan Black, a very incredibly knowledgeable young man who we had a fun conversation about mental health and food and farmers, and it was really, really interesting. I wish I could have played more. Unfortunately, not all of it fit on this podcast because I was asking some really weird questions. Not Brendan's fault, my fault. I just asked questions that had no business being on this podcast. So anyway, thank you to Brendan. All right, this is coming live from Thursday afternoon. I changed my mind from earlier when I was recording this yesterday. I'm not going to comment real deep here about the election. It's still going. It's looking like Biden is going to win, but nothing is certain yet. There were some major wins for drug policy, which is awesome. And I'm going to talk about all of that next week instead. So without further ado, here is this episode.
Hi, my name is Brendan Black. I'm a 20-year-old college student living in Central California. I'm studying to be an agriculture teacher for high school students. And I kind of just, I don't know, I enjoy agriculture, enjoy public speaking, just, kind of like being a college kid. It's kind of fun. Not right now, obviously, because the whole country is shut down, but, we're making the most out of it. My podcast is about food, but it's more about how the food gets from the farm to the plate. There's actually like a psychological component to food at all, not just specific foods, but the fact that we are eating and the fact that agriculture exists. There's there's historical evidence to suggest that agriculture is tied into society and tied into psychology in ways that we don't really appreciate yet. So there have been a lot of ties to food and our mental health. I mean, all throughout history, all throughout religion, all kinds of, there's been connections everywhere. And, the first thing that comes to mind for me, and this isn't, a religious tangent, but that we hear religious stories all the time about different types of food. Well, the one that comes to mind for me is the apple in the Bible. Obviously, there's the forbidden fruit. That fruit, eating that food triggered some kind of psychological transformation that turned us into the world that we know today, if you believe in that kind of stuff. But even if you don't, you have to acknowledge that every society, every religion, every belief system is based around the idea that food has a transformative property. And we've actually seen that in modern psychology. People often say that, if you're having a disagreement with somebody, or if somebody's in a really bad mood, or if they're kind of, getting impatient, you offer them food. Maybe they don't know they're hungry, but eating food, even if they're not hungry, tends to have a psychologically transformative effect on them that puts them in a better mood. And why that is still kind of up in the air. I think a lot of it has to do with the hormones released when we eat food, and maybe it's just from the warmth and the energy that is created through our digestion of that food. But the one thing is clear, and that's that food does have a deep psychological tie to our ability to kind of function in the world and transform our world around us. If you want to go into specifics, obviously there are certain foods that are better for you than others. I mean, it's been proven that chocolate actually has a beneficial effect on your mental health. There are certain foods that are better for your not mental health in terms of emotional health, but mental health in terms of physically mental health. So like blueberries are really good for combating like Alzheimer's and that kind of stuff. Hey, if you eat nothing but chocolate and blueberries every day, I guarantee you're going to be the happiest person in the world. So I grew up in a small town, obviously, and I was learning very quickly that from the farmer point of view, the consumers, your average person doesn't really know much about agriculture, and they don't care. And so, and because of that, they're voting on things, they're making purchasing decisions, they're making their perspectives around a negative connotation towards agriculture that really doesn't need to exist. And so the entire inspiration for me starting my podcast was to have these conversations with people, to ask them questions, to have them ask me questions, to kind of get an on-flowing conversation about, what it is about agriculture people are so scared of, what it is they want to know more about. That's been kind of the motivation behind my podcast, is just kind of get a flowing conversation, whether it's a productive one or not, just kind of get some kind of conversation out there about what's going on in the ag industry and what people need to know about their food. And if you want to contact me, you can get a hold of me pretty much anywhere on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter under the title Talk Ag to Me. So it's TALKAGTOME. And then my personal stuff is my full name. So it's Brendan, BRENDAN, Black, just like the color, pretty much everywhere. And I'm always open to conversations. Even if you don't want to come on an episode, I'm happy to talk to you about pretty much anything you have questions about.
My brother and his wife had their first child recently, and it was a pretty big deal. It was, the first grandchild from my parents. But unfortunately for me, I'm just not that big of a baby guy. Like, I'm super awkward when I hold him. My brother put his son in my lap, and my nephew looked up at me with this expression like, "You have no idea what you're doing, do you?" There's pictures, they're pretty hilarious. But lucky for me, thanks to my podcast sponsor, Kia Babies, I knew exactly where to go to get the perfect baby gift. I got my nephew this adorable little towel. It's got these bear ears on it. And now my entire family gets to enjoy these really cute pictures of my nephew. He's all smiley and he's got bear ears. I mean, that's pretty adorable, right? So next time you need a perfect baby gift or just something for your own kid, go check out Kia Babies. You can find a link in my show notes or on my podcast website. And when you check out, tell them that Choose Your Struggle sent you. You are the only podcast I listen to with a catchphrase, which is pretty cool.
Oh, well, that's awesome. Hello, beautiful people.
There you go. I love it. I look forward to it. It's like a friend saying, "Hey, what's up?"
Oh, I love that. Well, so that when we started the podcast, I didn't know how to open it. And so I was always I've always been a big fan of Marilyn Manson. And The Beautiful People was one of the songs, one of his early 90s hits, right? And so I just started with "Hello, beautiful people." And it was just kind of like an inside joke with myself. And it stuck. So yeah, that's been doing it ever since.
Well, we'll get to the podcast in a little, but before you and I was on yours 6 months, sometime during COVID. Who knows?
Literally don't even know what time is anymore.
Earlier this year, this actually won't even come out for a couple months. So by the time this comes out, it could have been a year ago. Who knows? We got connected, and then we realized while we were chatting that our experiences were very different, but they crossed. Like, we had cross points. And so I would love for you to tell your story, and then we'll kind of jump onto some of those cross points that I think are really interesting.
Okay. I always felt different, and in many ways I was different. I lived in Boston, Massachusetts, was born in Rhode Island. My parents are New Englanders. My mom is from Rhode Island. She's a Rhode Island WASP, and my dad is Jewish New Yorker. And so in that situation, I had two very different cultures growing up. So that made me different. Not really feeling like I fit anywhere. And then I moved to Silicon Valley, where I grew up when I was 7, and I went to Catholic school. And so I had my father was a Jewish New Yorker, my mother was a Rhode Island WASP, and I was in Catholic school. So I had a lot of feelings of different and separateness, which I think did not help things. I did have childhood sexual trauma, which I also think did not help things. But I don't think any of those things made me an alcoholic or a drug addict. I think that I was, we have a long family history of addiction. And I think that I really always wanted to be someone else doing something else somewhere else, just cellularly wanted to be different and fantasized about being different and doing things different all the time. But of course, none of the other things that happened helped the situation. And so I started, I had my first drink when I was 7. I stole a beer from my parents. I knew you weren't supposed to. So that's why it was attractive to me. I don't think I had any concept of getting drunk. And it took me a week to drink that beer in a closet, which is where I turned out to love drinking later in my life. And from there it was, Robitussin here and sugar, mostly sugar. So sugar was definitely a big piece of that. Anything that changed how I felt from the neck up, that was kind of my focus. And I hit puberty really young. Again, lots of different things mixed in here that made me feel different. But again, I think it was all really, I think a huge piece of this is genetic, right? Environment, genetics load the gun, environment pulls the trigger. And that continued as I got older. By the time, I was experimenting with things, marijuana, alcohol, cocaine by middle school. I was heavily addicted to cocaine by the time I was 13. And then my boyfriend put a needle on my arm for the first time when I was 15. And I had my first overdose at 15.
And that was heroin.
That was heroin, yes.
Yeah. Wait, so let's actually pause on that, because that is an experience that I think a lot of people, well, let me take that the other way. Very few people will identify with that experience, even those who are listening and who have used. Not that many of us get started that way. Was that something that did you invite this, or was this sort of like a him, like, hey baby, try this with me sort of thing?
Well, I should back up a little bit and say that, when we started dating, I was incredibly addicted to cocaine. He was, I don't know, I can't remember, but somewhere between like 12 and 15 years older than me. And I didn't know he was addicted to heroin when we started dating. We did a lot of cocaine together, but didn't know about the heroin. And when I found out about the heroin, I tried to get him off the heroin because, Captain Save the Ho. And he tried to get me off, cocaine, and it was just this, codependency cluster F. And so I think I had gotten to the point where I wasn't stopping him, he wasn't stopping me, and I was just curious at this point. And I was also super loaded that night from other things. So, inhibitions were down, and it was just a slow progression. But if you had told anyone that I would have been involved with needles, they would have laughed. I mean, I was terrified of needles, terrified. And that I was never going to do that. I was a straight A student. I mean, all the things that would have been things to stop me from that being where I ended up, other than the fact that I liked drugs and alcohol, that was never where I saw myself going. In fact, that was exactly where I figured I would stop. Like I would stop right before then. And I guess just the combination of curiosity. And then I did it that one time, and I had an overdose. I didn't, not so much that I stopped breathing, but I definitely had all the other symptoms of overdose, and it was so unpleasant. I hated it. Absolutely hated it, and was like, why would you do this? This is terrible. Make this stop. And in some ways, I think he gave me too much so that I wouldn't like it, but that's a whole other story. And then a couple months later, as the alcoholic drug addict thinking I had the bright idea that maybe I did too much, and if I did less, I would enjoy the real perks of whatever would be included with a heroin addiction. Not really knowing what that was, not really understanding that once you get addicted, you get high. You get sick and you get well, and that's it. And there's no more high. There's no more, it's sick and well. And that piece, I had no experience with. I didn't know any other heroin addicts. I didn't know that much about heroin. So it was really one of those situations where I really had no idea what I was getting myself into, other than the fact that I knew you weren't supposed to do it. But when someone, when the DARE campaign tells you, don't do this, it's bad, people, all these things, and then you see it up close, right? With whether that's cocaine or heroin, you think of heroin as like a monster that's going to jump out at you and claw your face off like honey badger, like I thought that's the feeling you get. But when you see someone take a small hit of this or whatever, you see it in a bag and it looks like a tiny piece of dirt, and the person takes it and they don't die and it's mild or whatever, you now don't believe anything that other group of people says, right? Or like, oh, every time you do cocaine, you're going to drop dead. Now you don't believe anything. Now, so it was kind of like that, like that it completely invalidated anything anyone had ever told me. And so I threw, the baby out with the bathwater on that.
Yeah. So as I like to say a lot in this podcast, fuck DARE. You and I actually had a really fun conversation about this when I was on your show, about that saying that we both hate. I wouldn't trade my worst day in recovery for my best day when I'm using, and how fucking stupid that saying is, because we act like if we don't talk about the good stuff, nobody will want to do it. Right. When in reality, it's quite the opposite. Then people learn not to trust you.
Right. Exactly. So I just didn't know. And I really, I didn't know. And I was so far into my cocaine addiction that cocaine had stopped working. And I was kind of in, like, I was so deep, and no one else was in deep with me. So he was my only life preserver in a weird way. And so, I was worse than everybody else anyway. I'd gotten myself in so deep. There was no one I could talk to about what was going on. So I got myself in this situation. And from there, it was just absolutely spiraled downhill. I went to a lockdown treatment center when I was 16. In Utah, which was very abusive and damaging, but it was a holding center. I don't know that it was a holding place for me, for my parents, where they knew that I wouldn't die if I was there. And honestly, I don't know that I would have made it had I not been there. So, trade-offs. And I ended up going to about 7-8 programs, depending on how you count outpatient and detox and psych wards. I had another heroin overdose May 17th of 2004, where my parents, my dad found me blue, not breathing, in effect dying from heroin overdose. And I talk about this a lot because this was the same way that I ended up getting sober in January of 2006. So at a certain point, you're like, oh, I'm putting needles in my arms, I'm a heroin addict, and I have a problem. Like, it's pretty hard. I'm sure people do it, but it's pretty hard to say, like, I'm a casual, heroin shooter, and I don't have a drug problem. So I was pretty aware that I had a serious drug problem. But the alcoholism piece, it wasn't that I didn't have alcoholism. It was that my drug problem was so bad that it overshadowed my alcoholism. But if you took my drug addiction out of the picture, my alcoholism was pretty bad. I just didn't see it.
Mm-hmm.
And it was so low bar compared to what the other things I was doing. So I continually tried to prove this, once I got my arms around the fact that I had this drug problem, I continually tried to prove that I could drink like other people, that my alcohol intake was not a problem, that, such and such was a phase. I was so young. And every time that brought me back to some place, took different lengths of time. Every time it brought me back to a life-altering moment with a needle in my arm. Every single time. The time where I overdosed, I had started drinking in my closet, because I was a big fan of drinking alone in my closet. I was like, you have a problem when you're just so excited to get into the closet and start drinking. And I'd come home from treatment, started drinking, and apparently somewhere along the way I blacked out. That was the last thing I remember, is drinking. Somehow I went and hadn't lived at home for a year, went and got heroin, needles, blah, 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 blah. And then they found me with a bungee cord wrapped around, like I woke up with a bungee cord and, paramedics over me, my sweatshirt cut off, people giving me CPR. Like, that's what I woke up to, having gone in drinking. Mm-hmm. I have no idea where or how I got drugs. No idea. So and I did the same, not the same thing, not make the decision. I wasn't in a blackout, but the same type of thing happened when I did get sober at 19. Which was that I tried to prove that I could drink like a normal person. And, I don't think I was drinking like a normal person, but I was drinking without severe consequences. Sure. Right. And, for a few months. And then there was a huge incident, emotional blow up with my boyfriend that I could not handle. And stone cold sober, I got in my Jetta. I was living in Prescott, Arizona. I drove down to Phoenix, again, stone cold, sober at that moment, and walked around knocking on trailer park doors because I didn't know where to find heroin, opening the door, people, and being like, I have money. Do you have heroin? Like, I look back, I was like, God, I was just so ballsy. It's just like unbelievable. And, eventually I hit the magic trailer, and they
wait, that's the title of this interview right there. Hit the magic trailer with actually Loeb Blassingame.
Let's be real. The magic trailer. Oh God. My poor parents, like all the things that could happen. I'm like, bingo. They're like, you have money. We have drugs. But no, I didn't have any, and they didn't have any clean rigs. All of their syringes that they had were used and they were rusted. And so I did use junkie folklore, where you pump it 10 times full of Clorox, and then voila, all diseases are cast out. And I did this in the bathroom of this trailer. And next thing I know, I lost my hearing and I lost my vision. So I must have shot some amount of Clorox. I didn't want to overdose in this trailer. So I did tiny little shots, like lots of tiny little shots in both of my arms, because somehow I thought that was going to stop. I have a lot of great ideas when I'm using. Mm-hmm. That was going to stop me from overdosing there. And instead, what it did, well, I guess I didn't overdose, so that was good. But I temporarily lost vision and hearing. And then I infected all the veins in both of my arms and could not move either of my arm. Woke up several hours later, 100 miles away at my house. Like, somehow I got home. My car was gone though. And I was with two guys I didn't know, and they had my drugs, and both of my arms were stuck in, like, out in front of me in this, like, kind of marching position. And I couldn't move them. And I was yelling at these people to give me drugs, but, like, I couldn't administer them to myself on my own, which is how I described, like, my incomprehensible demoralization. That bottom, my bottom was, it wasn't the worst thing that had ever happened to me, but it was this moment of, like, I can't even I render myself incapable of giving myself drugs within 24 hours. That was not the plan. The plan was not to get so medically disabled in 24 hours that I had to stop using. The plan was to go back and get sober like a week later. You know, I thought I had a week run in me, not 24 hours. And so I had to go to the hospital, and my mom was called, you know, it was just a complete shit show. It was like, I can't keep doing this. I'm just exhausted from this. I'm so like, this life is exhausting me, and I'm not dying. I kind of always thought I would just drop dead in some of this, and then it would be, you know, really, oh, so sad, too bad. And that wasn't happening. It was just 24 hours, some horrific thing. You're in the hospital. Everybody's upset with you. You've lost the car. You've lost you know, it's just like I come to in these most dramatic situations, and then I have to clean it up. And I was just tired. And my mom said to me, in the hospital, she said, "Are you going to make me bury you?" And it was just like the culmination of those things. And I knew I had been in enough treatment. I had been to enough 12-step. I had been in enough therapy that I knew what to do. And I did those things. And, you know, I have put together a day at a time for over 14 years of clean and sober time, with a lot of crazy, you know, struggle and shit in between.
Well, your story, it's amazing you're still with us. And I'm glad that you are. You sort of, if we were playing in recovery bingo, you would have won a couple of times now. Your story checks off all of you've got the cross, you've got the line down, you've got the side, you've got all of it. Your story of use hits all of the boxes.
Perfect. I love that. There was a game in early sobriety. We would go to these huge young people in AA, young people conventions. And it was, I mean, people thought we were drunk and we were just wild and rowdy. It was how we partied in our 20s. We went to this convention, and we would, you know, groups of us in our early 20s sober, we would play this game, Never Have I Ever.
Yeah.
And it would be, you know, 100 people in these conference rooms at 2 a.m. And I'll never forget, we were in Reno, Nevada in the early 2000s or in mid 2000s. And there was Never Have I Ever. And we were playing this game. So I set off Never Have I Ever. And it was something to do with our, you know, using stories or whatever. No one got up. I did a full, like 100 people are in this room. And I don't even remember what I said, but I had, you know, lots of girlfriends there who were peeing their pants laughing at me. I did a full revolution around the circle to like wait for my seat to like jump up to see. And I was like, so out of 100 people, no one, okay. So, all right, I'm just gonna.
Yep. Yeah. Those of us with these lived experiences, you know, my wife knows this, that there's very few circumstances where she will like, oh, wait, have you ever done that? And I'll be like, yeah, you know, because it's like, you know, we lived a lot during those periods. And this comes back to what you and I we talked about on your show, and also what I mentioned earlier, which is that it doesn't have to be harmful to reminisce on some of this, because it's not like every day was horrible, you know? And there's a guy I had on my show that I actually think would be great for yours. He's the musician Hoodie Time. And he and I went through our stuff around the same time. We knew each other and we were partying together. And we had a lot of fun reminiscing. And he was like, man, you know, I hate that we're not supposed to do this. And I was like, yeah, but that's such an outdated idea, you know, that you'll want to use again if you think about the good times.
Well, because at the end, right, like I could tell you the story of going to Phoenix and the Magic Trailer Park. And, you know, that wasn't fun.
Yeah.
That wasn't there. I mean, it's funny that I had the idea to drive down 2 hours sober, and like, it's ballsy, but like the fun stuff, like that's more like the crazy stuff we did. That's like, who does that?
Yeah.
But like the fun stuff happened. There was a lot of fun stuff that led up to that happened before it got so bad.
Mm-hmm.
And then we were stuck in that washing machine, you know, just on repeat, right? But like to say that none of it was fun is just a lie. It's just a blatant lie.
So you're doing all of this while most people are going to prom and doing all of like the normal high schooly things, did you graduate on like as expected? What was your path?
So my high schooling was mostly in adolescent programs. I actually graduated from an online high school while I was in college because I was like, I'm going to graduate high school, damn it. And so it's kind of we have a funny joke about how like I don't do anything in the right order. So the first 2 years, like I would go to, I went to a couple outpatient programs. Was hospitalized a few times, but my freshman year I was in a public school in the Bay Area. And then my sophomore year, I was at an alternative school, which is the most fun. It was just like an everyday party. And then I was thrown out of that school with a 4.0 GPA and just like a whole host. They were like, yeah, you're a great student and we still don't want you back. And then that summer, after a series of things, that was when I got in trouble with the law and ended up having people come into the middle of the night and take me away from my parents to treatment.
But eventually you get into recovery and you go to college.
And yes, eventually I started community college. I hadn't graduated high school. I graduated high school while I'm in community college, and then I applied to UCLA. I got into UCLA, graduated from there in 2011, and then I was going to go to law school, and started studying for the LSAT. I was working at the Orange County Public Defender's Office and started consulting on a project that my dad and his business partner were doing around, helping people get into treatment or access treatment earlier. And I had sworn, they would talk to me about this. And I was like, I never, ever, ever. And every time I say this, I don't say it anymore because it totally screws me. I was like, I don't ever want to work in treatment. Like I had been in treatment for over 2 years. Like I was so institutionalized. I just did not want anything to do with the industry. I didn't want my whole life to be about the irony. I didn't want my whole life to be about my drug addiction. Like I was like, I need to be something more than this. Like I'm so much more than this. And so I did a whole bunch of other things, but eventually I was like, I don't want to go to law school. This is not like, I don't want to do this. And I helped, co-found and start Lionrock Recovery, which was the first telehealth program done for substance use disorders, done entirely online through video conference, which now is much more normal. But in 2010, when we started, was not only abnormal, but was not welcome by people in our industry. And, it's been 10 years since then, since we founded the company, and it's grown just exponentially, in much of it in this last year since COVID, which has been just this crazy explosion of growth. But over the last, probably around 8 years, people started to take an interest in what we were doing.
So this is about 15 minutes later than I normally do this, but let's pause and give my listeners a chance to learn where they can find you online, on social media, and all that kind of stuff.
Lionrockrecovery.com is where you can find the treatment, the professional treatment services that are online, full outpatient program. Lionrock.life is where you can find all of our free support groups for whatever you're recovering from, including 12-step and non-12-step. And also the podcast, The Courage to Change, a recovery podcast. And the Instagram and Facebook handles are all the same. Courage to Change podcast, Lionrock.life, Lionrock Recovery, and then mine is Ashley Loeb Blassingame.
Hey, y'all. Because I didn't cover any of this stuff on the intro, I'm going to go ahead and replace one of my normal ads with a quick ad for my stuff here in the middle of the episode. Thank you to everyone who's ordered merch. I have another shipment going out later this week, and it makes me super happy, so thank you. Keep reaching out for merch. You can find that on my website, on social media. Thank you as well to people who keep filling out the survey and leaving reviews. Remember that until the end of the season, every review that is left, every survey that is filled out, gives you a chance to enter for some merch. One person will win a tank top, so please keep doing that. You can find that in the show notes. You can find it on my podcast website, jshifman.com, and go to the podcast page. Please keep sharing, keep liking, keep reviewing, keep doing all of the things. We are nearing the end of season 1, and I would love to keep this momentum going into season 2. All right, thank you all. Let's get back to the episode. Lionrock constantly gets great reviews, and this is in an industry that's not, unfortunately, the norm.
Yeah.
There are a lot of bad actors out there, and it's almost, to be frank, hard to defend sometimes, because people are like, I don't really want to go to treatment. Look at all these stories, and you're kind of like, I mean, you're not wrong. There's a lot of bad ones, but then there are really good ones like Lionrock. Other than the fact that you've been through the ringer, you were there, and you guys have an amazing podcast. What is different about Lionrock that makes it puts it ahead above the rest of all these other garbage places?
So the co-founders, myself, my father, and my business partner, Ian, two of them come from, so Ian and Peter come from the rest of the business world, and they're not sober. And so while they have family experiences, they come from, vast business background. My dad always says, my dad, who's Peter, he says, look, I worked on Wall Street, and the treatment business is often dirtier than Wall Street, and which I always cringe.
Yeah.
And I think the fact that, one of the things that they always talk about, we started Lionrock when I was 23. So I didn't have a ton of experience outside of the few weird jobs that I had. And one of the things that they talk about is, in the treatment business, this is considered like 5-star treatment. In the rest of the business world, this is considered best practice. You don't lie or cheat or steal. You don't bill insurance where something, for something you didn't do. It's not something that you can get away with very much, and people don't typically do it at the same rate. So I think coming from this background, I remember early on saying, well, this is what everybody's doing, because my friends all own homes and, treatment homes and blah, 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 blah. This is what everybody else is doing. And I would say, like, this is commonplace, and they were like, yeah, but it's illegal.
Yeah.
And I would say, okay, but it's not unethical.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it is illegal, but it's not unethical. And they're like, right, but it's illegal. Like, those types of things. And then, we definitely don't do things that are unethical. But we also don't do things that are illegal. So when you take those two things out, and when the patient is number one, it's actually not that hard. But it's a very, very, very difficult business to make money in and to stay afloat. And so what I do understand is that a lot of people do things that aren't unethical, but are illegal in order to keep the doors open, because it's so hard to make money. Well, we came from the big business world. We had institutional investors. We had done things in a very different way. So it wasn't small, 3-person owned treatment centers trying to stay afloat and doing things that were in the gray area or not gray area to stay that way.
And I think that's really important to say because I don't want to paint too broad of a brush. There are way too many people who get into that line of work only to make money. They don't do anything good. But then there are a lot of people who get into it for the right reasons and end up in that gray area doing things that are not unethical but illegal. Yeah. Because they're forced to by our shitty healthcare system, our awful industry of insurance that makes it almost impossible.
I mean, we always say the insurance companies, it's like they don't want us to be in business at all. I mean, they basically make it impossible. And it has so many places, including huge household names, have gone under because it just wasn't tenable. You couldn't, I mean, insurance companies reduced what they paid us by 30% in 1 year, but the costs went up. The cost of providing service went up. I mean, it was just, it's crazy. So I understood where a lot of that was coming, but what it changes. And then you have things, and then you do have really bad people, right? I mean, you probably have those in every industry, but you have what we call body brokers and things like that. And people who take advantage of the fact that it's a hard business to make money in. Right. And when, so it's all that stuff. And it's stuff, for the analogy, it's stuff that happens on Wall Street too. I mean, I think where there's, loopholes and struggle and competition, this stuff happens, but it also, doing the right thing by your patients just has to be number one. And if you use that as your guiding light, then truly number one, then I think it makes the other stuff a lot easier. Like, do your patients need to be drug tested 8 times a day? No.
I would assume not.
Unless you have a really bad program.
Yeah, I can't envision a situation where anyone needs that many drug tests.
I mean, I can't either, but
I think that is a topic we could go round for round in because it's something that we both have seen up close. And I think one of the things that was so fascinating when you and I spoke the first time was about how we both went through what is thankfully now a more outdated mode of treatment, which was the sit everybody in a circle, the shit that was in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and hasn't changed when you and I went over this. It went through this in the early, in the mid 2000s, and how incredibly damaging that can be to somebody. And yet it was still the modus operandi as of 10 years ago.
Yep. It was that break you down to build you back up thing. And what they did not calculate for was that we were broken. We showed up broken, I mean, it's kind of, they do that in prison, right? They break you down and then build you into this institutional thing, but you come in broken. It doesn't, and that level of trauma and abuse does not help you heal, but again, thank God that's so much of that is we aren't seeing that as much.
So how has this year been for, I imagine, like you said, you guys have grown, but is it because there are more people moving online or because there are just that many more people who are really struggling right now, a little from column A, a little from column B?
Yeah, I think a huge percentage is online, that many people are online. I think there is a percentage of people who who were on the edge and it threw them over the edge and then they can't go in person or insert, long list of things. Also financially, our program is way more affordable, which was part of why we did it that way.
Sure.
Because we felt like, having to get a second mortgage on your home just to put your child into some sort of substance use treatment, when we know that multiple times is usually what it takes, the whole thing, right. That didn't make sense. So I think it's a combination of things, and that desperation, what people can afford, going online, frail family, just all of it. And, but a huge piece was like everybody came online. And I also think suddenly people knew that this was an option. That was another thing. There was just this, we always used to say, like, you didn't know you needed an iPad until you knew what an iPad was. Right. And that's the same, like people didn't know we existed.
So let's address those who are listening maybe, or they're listening, they know someone and they're going, wow, this sounds awesome. Like, I didn't know this was a thing, like you were just saying. What does working with Lionrock sort of give a snapshot of what that treatment looks like?
Well, we're primary substance use disorder treatment at the moment. And that means that you have to have some sort of substance use. And we're an outpatient program. So we've actually been using Zoom for 8 years. And you would call, you call or do live chat with one of our admissions counselors on the website, and they would do an intake and an assessment with you. And then basically we have 50 different program tracks that for people in any time zone to make it work, any time zone, any schedule, emergency room doctors, oil rig workers, you name it, we have it. And I almost said formula, the outpatient, it's group, an intensive outpatient is group 3 times a week for 3 hours with an individual session once a week. So that's 10 hours of treatment a week. And then you step down to outpatient, which is group twice a week for 90 minutes, and then an individual. So every week, every level, you get an individual with your primary counselor once a week. And the combination, typically on average, people do 3 months, but people do anything from a month and a half to 2 years. So, we have a curriculum that is incredible. I mean, that is just the backbone of our program. And we have speakers come in, we have, do all sorts of different dynamic. We have a trauma group, we have women's groups, men's groups, so LGBTQ groups. So the research shows that the combination of group and individual counseling, the treatment, substance use specific, make just a huge difference in the outcomes of people who just do individual, which is of course what everyone wants to do. Everyone just wants to, I don't like to, blah, blah, blah. But the people who do group and individual do so much better in outcome studies. And so that's a huge piece of it. And I think it's so important. And then it's kind of, you focus on what it is that's going on, what your individual components are with your primary therapist.
So I'm really glad you touched that, because one of the things that when you and I were when I first got introduced to your podcast, actually, and looked into what Lionrock was, I was so impressed that everyone gets at least 1 session a week of individual, because so many of these places only do group. Because
insurance doesn't pay for it. So we take a loss on it.
On each individual session.
That's right.
So that's another example of Lionrock putting the patient first, even though. So in your eyes, then, you see this from the other end. Is that something that we just have to get the insurance to be held accountable for?
So yes, I mean, they make it so that you have to do. They make it so they give you a package price, or they bundle the price of what they'll pay basically for certain policies. And in some of them, it's like they'll only pay for it if you do it on the same day that you did some other 3-hour group. And so you can get it paid for if you make the person to sit through 3 hours of group and then an hour of individual, which no one wants to do.
So they make you jump through all these hoops for something that everybody should be getting. Is that
right? And it's one of those things. And this is where my team is kind of the way that, so 2 people who are from, corporate America, and then me, who's not only in recovery, but has been to too many treatment centers. And I've also been to every level of care that exists, from, from 5150 to luxury 30-day. So, it's just not an option. Like, it's just not optional. So I say, like, where do we cut? Because we're not going to not do that. But, we do sit in these meetings and look at the numbers going, what are we going to do? How do we do this? How do we pay the therapists who are like, we don't want to be overworked. We don't want to be, undervalued. We don't, totally all those things. Our rates are going up. Cost of living is going up while the insurance company is pulling down the numbers and people don't have the money to pay for treatment. It's just like, it's so frustrating. But yeah, so that is, no matter what you're doing, you have an individual session, an hour a week.
Well, it's a shame that you have to make those choices. But obviously your patients are lucky that you do. Again, a topic we could talk about for hours, but I am very conscious of both of our time. So I'm going to go into the final two questions I ask everybody on every interview. Number one, we are living in an unprecedented time of stress, anxiety, and all that. What are your self-care habits? What is working for you right now? And talk a little bit about that.
So exercise, I know that's sounds like I'm every wellness coach on the planet. There's a lot of great neuroscience around why it matters, but exercise for me helps my depression, helps my eating, helps it all. I did buy a stationary bike of a popular that has been very helpful because the barrier to entry is quite small.
Yeah.
It's right next to me. So I've been doing that and swimming a lot, just making sure there's some amount of exercise because it really helps my depression, which is around isolation and connection, which has been harder, that kind of thing. Getting out and, again, I live in Southern California, so easy for me, but getting out into the sunshine, getting sunshine on my skin. There's a lot of research that shows that helps a lot. And then using Insight Timer on my phone to do at least 5 minutes of meditation. And lastly, I've been in Overeaters Anonymous for over a year. I mean, I've been in and out I like to say I come annually for 15 years, but I've been, consistently going for a year and a half. And I discovered something to complement that, which has been a game changer for me called Bright Line Eating, which is a program designed by a woman who's a neuroscientist, who's in recovery a gazillion years, who was in OA for 12 years. And long story short, for people like me, with my background, my history, I have struggled very, very much with eating sugar and flour, and they make me an insane human being. And I have done everything under the sun not eat those things in my diet. And finally was just willing. I don't know. I just became willing. And since I have taken those things out imperfectly, out of my diet, I am so much, and this happened during COVID. I am so much saner. It's like, I wish I wasn't, because then I could be like, oh, no big deal. But just, I sleep better. I'm just a lot less tired, a lot less moody. So that has been a huge self-care thing for me, because I regularly just want to eat my feelings, especially during COVID era. And I have a good life. Things are good for me. So the fact that I want to use things to feel better, I mean, it's, in some ways it's historically accurate. In other ways, it's just goes to show you that, all of us are feeling that, the tension from the world. I think not to sound too California woo-woo, but I think the vibration on the planet is just different. It just feels different. So those have been my main go-tos.
Well, thank you for that. And I do want to say that if any of my followers go follow you on Instagram, you are very, you don't hold back. You aren't one of those people that puts up a fake, Instagram feed where it makes it look like everything's perfect. You're very honest with your social media, and I appreciate that about you.
Well, I could just say, I love it. People are like, I love your parenting. It's just like, you let them make messes and it's messy and it's this. And I'm like, man, is that a compliment? I don't know. But yes, it's definitely real and people notice.
Well, your boys are very cute. All right, final question. We've talked a lot about the amazing work you and Lionrock are doing today. Who are some people that you want to shout out that are doing awesome work that we should go follow, we should go read, we should go watch, listen to, whatever the case is?
Okay, so this is like a mild plug, but it's not 100% a plug. So I'm doing a panel on National Online Recovery Day, which is September 22nd. And one of my favorite people, and I'm going to try to not fangirl all over her, is going to be on the panel. Her name is Gabby Bernstein. She's sober and she does amazing stuff if you're into that stuff. So I would definitely follow her. Susan Pierce Thompson, neuroscientist of Bright Line Eating, and the Holistic Psychologist on Instagram. Really love following her. Find her stuff to be really inspiring. I'll leave those as my top 3.
Have you ever thought about starting your own podcast and then thought, oh, man, I don't even know where to begin? Well, I have the perfect answer for you. It's Anchor. They have all the tools you need to get started right away, all in one spot. You can do it from your phone or your computer. They'll even distribute for you, so you don't have to go looking for places to get your podcast out. But the best part is it's all free. That's right, you can sign up today without any hassle at all. You can even start making money right from the beginning. It's everything you need in a podcast in one place. So check it out today. Go to anchor.fm or download the free Anchor app to get started. All right, we've come to the end of another episode. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Choose Your Struggle podcast. Thank you to my guests, Ashley Loeb Blassingame and Brendan Black. I'm going to keep this short because this is going to be a longer episode already. Today's card brought to you by Blurt, as always. Thank you, Blurt, for your incredible work. Today's card is coming from the Believe in Yourself card pack, because no matter which side you are on the political spectrum here in the U.S., I think we can all agree this shit ain't working. So, you gotta believe in yourself. And the card. Nobody knows your heart better than you. Trust your instincts. Never let anyone cast a shadow over your sunshine. And that was said by a person named Michael Faudet. That's a great card, and that goes well into what I was just saying. At this point, this idea that some political party is going to save us, or some political leader is going to save us, or blah, 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 it's just not happening. It's not happening, because no matter what, I'm recording this again, I'm still on Wednesday, no matter what happens, it probably won't be decided by the time I put this podcast out, but the fact is, as we've seen, this shit is super broken. And it goes even farther back to the fact that we aren't allowing people to really express themselves, right? Because third parties aren't allowed in this country for all intents and purposes. We legally disenfranchise just as many people who vote third parties. That's a problem. And so many people are disgusted by this that we're celebrating the highest turnout since 1900, and it's going to be roughly 2/3 of our population, which is really high for the U.S., and this is all just terribly sad. So trust yourself, do what you got to do for you, because ain't nobody else coming to save you. And that is your good egg for this week. Your good egg is to do something for yourself. The last 2 years of this election, and it is 2 years, by the way, that's not an exaggeration. The first people announced they were running for president roughly end of November of 2018. Who knows at this point? It could have been 2005 because COVID and this election has gone on for as long as we've all been alive. Take some time this weekend for you. Take some time to just do something to make you happy. Do a hobby, go for a walk, be with your loved ones, do something for you, because again, no matter who ends up winning this thing, none of this is over. The country is still deeply divided. Racism is still an American value. But it's just, at this point, just do what you got to do for you. All right, most importantly, remember, be vulnerable, be empathetic, spread your love, and choose your struggle. Huge shout out to my podcast sponsor, Mountain Made CBD. Mountain Made is changing the CBD game. by offering a line of high-dose CBD tablets at an affordable price. Their products are THC-free and third-party tested for accuracy, cleanliness, and potency. Their products, which now ship nationwide, include Build for CBD saturation, Boost for precision titration, and Recover for rest and rehab. With 9 years experience in hemp and fitness, Mountain Made's founders are focused on creating a quality CBD product to help those with activated lifestyles. Check out www.mountainmade.life to find out more about how their product can help you crush your life. And you know, I'm all about that. Remember, their products ship nationwide, so go check out the website today and follow them on social media at Mountain Made. And also listen to episode 7 with Mountain Made founder Mike Passion. All right, back to the episode.